HarperCollins presents A Boy of Good Breeding, written by Miriam Toews, read by Susanna Fournier.
Chapter 1. Algren was Canada's smallest town. It really was. Canada's smallest town. It said so on a big old billboard right outside the town limits, and Knute had checked with one of those government offices in the blue pages, and they said 1,500 is what you need for a town. And that's what Algren had. If it had one less, it would be a village, and if it had just one more, it would be a bigger town, like all the rest of the small towns. Being the smallest was its claim to fame. Knute had come to Algren from the city of Winnipeg to look after her dad, who'd had a heart attack, and to relieve her mom, who said if she spent one more day in the house, she'd go insane. She was 24 years old. Her mother, Dory, had intended her name to be pronounced Knute, but nobody got it, so it just became Knute, like Knute. Even her mom had given up on the part, but did it from time to time to call her Knute, or sometimes, and she hated this, Knuter. Knute had a daughter, Summer Phelan. And Summer Phelan had a strange way of shaking when she was excited. She flapped her arms and her fingers moved quickly as though she were typing to save her life, and sometimes her head went back and her mouth opened wide and sounds like ah and came out of it. When she first started doing it, Knute thought it was cute. Summer Phelan looked like she'd lift right off the ground. But then Knute started worrying about it and decided to take her to a specialist, a pediatric neurologist. He did a number of tests, including an encephalogram. Summer Phelan liked the wires and enjoyed the attention, but told the doctor that flapping was just something she was born to do. Eventually, after all the results came in and the charts had been read and analyzed, he agreed with her. She was born to flap. There was no sign of strange electrical activity in her brain, no reason to do a CAT scan, and all accounts of her birth indicated no trauma had occurred, nothing untoward as she had made her way through Knute's birth canal and into this world. Every night, Knute lay down with Summer Phelan. That was the time SF told Knute stories and let her in on her big plans, and Knute could feel her daughter's body tremble with excitement. It quivered, it shook. It was out of her control. Knute would hold Summer Phelan until she stopped shaking, maybe a twitch or two or a shudder, and fell asleep. The specialist said SF's condition, which wasn't really a condition, was very rare, but nothing to worry about. Then he'd added, in a thoughtful way, that the condition, or lack of condition, might be the precipitator to that rare phenomenon known as spontaneous combustion. So Knute worried, from time to time, about SF bursting into flames for no apparent reason. And that was the type of concern she couldn't really explain to people, even close friends, without them asking her if she needed a nap, or what she'd been reading lately, or just plain laughing at her. March was the month that Knute and Summer Phelan arrived in Algren. Tom had had a heart attack, or his heart attack, as Dory called it, in December. He'd been putting up the last decorations on the tree, and bam, it happened. He fell over, and because he was sort of clutching at the tree, it fell on top of him. 10 days later, in the sterile intensive care ward of the hospital, nurses were still finding tiny pine needles in his hair and in the many creases of his skin. He picked up a nasty infection called septicemia in the hospital, and as a result, his lungs malfunctioned, and he was put on a respirator. Of course, he couldn't talk, but in his more lucid, pain-free moments, he could write. Sort of. All he ever wrote, in a barely legible scrawl either stretched out over the whole page or sometimes scrunched up in the bottom corner, was, "How is the tree?" Or, "Is the tree okay?" Or, "Is the tree up?" Or, "I'm sorry about the tree." One day in the hospital, Dory told him, "Tom, it's Christmas Day today. Merry Christmas, sweetheart." His eyes were closed, but he squeezed her hand. She said, "Do you remember Christmas, darling?" And he opened his eyes and looked up at her and shook his head. Yet the next day again he wrote about the tree. He couldn't remember Christmas, but he knew a tree should, for some reason, be erected in his living room. Gradually he could remember a bit more, and he could spell world backwards and count by sevens and all those things they'd asked him to do in the hospital when he was off the respirator and out of intensive care, but still he had a strange scattered memory. Like, for instance, he knew he absolutely must shave every morning, but he was unsure why. He reminded Dory to check the battery in the smoke detector, but when she said, "Oh, Tom, what's the worst that can happen if our battery is dead for a day or two?" he didn't have an answer. So he was caught in a bind where he was committed to doing what he'd always done, but he couldn't remember why he was doing it. His life, some might have said, had no purpose. Neither did Knute's, really. Summer Phelan was in a daycare that she hated, and Knute was
Sample complete. Ready to continue?